In America's power arena, who wins the game? Welcome to American Power Play, your source for U.S. political.
They ridiculed his languid Southern pacing, but 2 hours later, the entire Capitol was struck dumb. The unassuming provincial attorney had just executed a maneuver nobody predicted. After 47 years of concealed indiscretions, this collision at the 38-minute mark would redefine American political perceptions. Even the pundits at CNN were forced to concede their miscalculations were total. Senator Kennedy, your quaint performance cannot obscure the fact that you are merely an uninformed regional instrument feigning legal expertise. You are a humiliation to this legislative body. Adam Schiff's vocal delivery was heavy with elitist scorn as he scanned the chamber anticipating acclaim. Senator John Kennedy leisurely doffed his spectacles, wiping them with a frayed cloth, before gazing upward with the tolerance of an educator addressing a hopelessly confused pupil. "Well, Congressman Schiff," he commenced, his Louisiana accent intentionally heavy, "my mother instructed me that when insults are hurled, one must offer enlightenment. Since you appear so distressed by my credentials, I suppose it is only equitable that I air my apprehensions regarding yours. The curriculum today concerns the distinction between a Harvard legal certification and Harvard-caliber morality. Class has begun, and unlike the fees for your donors, this instruction is provided gratis." The Senate Judiciary Committee room was occupied beyond its maximum limit. What was scheduled as a standard joint session on intelligence reformation had mutated into a gladiatorial spectacle. Rumors had permeated the Capitol that Adam Schiff intended to dismantle Senator John Kennedy, the Louisiana Republican, famous for his rustic mannerisms and vivid idioms. The visual disparity could not have been more pronounced. Schiff entered with a retinue comprising 3 attorneys, 5 aides, and 2 cartons of rigorously sorted files. His designer suit was immaculately ironed, and his California complexion radiated under the studio lights. He carried himself with the assurance of a prosecutor who had never suffered a defeat he had not previously engineered. Senator Kennedy had appeared unaccompanied, clutching a single scuffed leather satchel that appeared to have weathered a major hurricane. His attire was respectable yet indistinguishable, and his silver hair was somewhat disheveled. To a passing onlooker, he resembled a wayward grandfather who had inadvertently strolled into the wrong facility. The liberal press corps packed the media gallery with smartphones poised to record the expected mortification of another antiquated Southern conservative. The on-screen graphics for CNN were pre-configured to read Schiff School's Southern Senator on intelligence nuance. Schiff commenced with typical hubris, his tone saturated with coastal disdain. "Senator Kennedy," he started, emphasizing the honorific to imply it was unearned. "Your legislative history demonstrates persistent resistance to intelligence community improvements. You have labeled committed civil servants as deep state saboteurs. You have endorsed an executive who besieged our foundational institutions. Quite candidly, your regressive Southern policies possess no validity in grave deliberations regarding national safety." Kennedy observed silently, intermittently, polishing his eyewear with a handkerchief that had witnessed better decades. Schiff proceeded, becoming more audacious with every syllable. "Perhaps, if you dedicated less energy to inventing folksy aphorisms and more time to actually deciphering intelligence briefs, assuming you can comprehend them, you would grasp how overwhelmed you are." Several Democrats chuckled while the reporters typed with intensity. And regarding that accent, Schiff appended with a sneer, "Perhaps you could accelerate your speech. Some of us possess actual responsibilities to attend to this afternoon." Kennedy finally raised his eyes, a slight grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. He leaned into the microphone, his drawl becoming even more viscous than normal. "Well, Now, Congressman Schiff, I value your anxiety regarding my conversational velocity. I might resonate like a cartoon rooster, but at least I do not fabricate like a wooden puppet. The chamber rippled with movement. A few individuals laughed, and Schiff's complexion reddened marginally. You see, Kennedy proceeded, where I originate, we possess a maxim that advises against initiating trouble if one wishes to avoid it. But seeing as you introduced my academic background, I suppose I should note that I did manage to stumble through Vanderbilt University and the University of Virginia Law School. And what was that third institution? Oh yes, Oxford University. As in the school in England, as in a Rhodes Scholar. The laughter ceased abruptly, and Schiff blinked in rapid succession. Kennedy reached into his satchel and retrieved a bound manuscript. Actually, I have been conducting some reading of my own. This document is your Harvard Law thesis, Congressman, titled Prosecutorial Ethics in the Modern Justice System. It is captivating material. Page 47 is particularly illuminating. He realigned his glasses and commenced reciting. A prosecutor who distorts evidence or deceives the tribunal betrays not merely his position, but the very bedrock of justice itself. These are your own words, Congressman, so shall we debate how faithfully you have embodied them? Schiff's confident smirk evaporated completely. Now, you stated I lack comprehension of intricate legal concepts. Kennedy continued, so allow me to attempt to struggle through this next point. You also questioned my grasp of California statutes. Well, let us examine California Evidence Code, Section 1040, subsection B, which declares that public entities hold a privilege to withhold official information if disclosure harms the public interest. You contravened that specific section exactly 17 times during your tenure on the Intelligence Committee. He recited the dates and precise infractions from memory, his drawl never faltering. But I am merely a simple provincial lawyer, Kennedy added with dramatic humility. What would I comprehend about the penal codes of all 50 states that I have memorized for recreation? The press gallery had fallen silent. This was not the slaughter they had anticipated, or at least not in the direction they had forecasted. Schiff attempted to recuperate by stating that memorizing statutes does not render one qualified to debate intelligence issues. Speaking of intelligence, Kennedy interjected softly, opening his briefcase once more. I have brought some assignments, 23 folders to be precise. Each one documents what my grandfather would term shenanigans from your professional history. He extracted folder after folder, aligning them meticulously on the table. Each one bore a label clearly discernible to the cameras reading Russia hoax whistleblower coordination, illegal leaks, China connections, and other scandals. Now Congressman Schiff Kennedy said, his voice adopting a prosecutorial sharpness despite the sustained drawl. You characterized me as ignorant, regressive, and humiliating. My mother taught me that when an individual insults you in that manner, they are typically describing their own reflection. So let us examine that hypothesis. Shall we? Schiff's legal team commenced whispering frantically amongst themselves. This was not unfolding according to the strategy. But first Kennedy added, extracting his mobile device. I wish to display something intriguing. You see, while you were disparaging my intellect, the fine citizens back home in Louisiana were watching, and they possess some opinions. He displayed his phone screen to the recording cameras. His social media notifications were erupting with encouragement, while Schiff's were filling with inquiries regarding the contents of those folders. It appears those backward folks comprehend something you fail to grasp, Congressman. They can detect what my cousin Boudreaux calls a rodent in the woodpile from a mile away. And, sir, with all due respect, you are fouling the entire forest. The committee chairman, a Democrat, who had expected this to be a routine embarrassment of a Republican, shifted uneasily. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should concentrate on the itinerary." "Oh, I am delighted to concentrate on intelligence reform," Kennedy stated brightly, "starting with reforming the intelligence of specific committee members who would not identify the truth if it bit them on their Harvard-educated backside." Even some Democrats could not stifle their smiles at that remark. "So what is your preference?" Congressman Kennedy asked, gesturing to his pile of dossiers. "Do you wish to continue discussing my ignorance, or would you prefer to dissect your career because I have all day, and unlike some individuals, I speak the truth even when I speak slowly?" Schiff's face had transitioned from flushed to pallid. His lead counsel leaned in and whispered something critical into his ear. "Let us commence with Russia, shall we?" Kennedy suggested, reaching for the initial file. "Because that is where your tribulations originated." "Well, actually, they began in law school when you evidently skipped the ethics seminars, but Russia is where they became public knowledge." He opened the folder with the deliberate caution of a man unwrapping a Christmas gift he had been hoarding. "This is going to be more enjoyable than a crawfish boil." "In July?" Kennedy murmured, just loud enough for the microphones to capture. The hunter had become the prey, and the slow-talking Southern senator was about to demonstrate exactly why one should never judge a book by its dialect. Now Congressman Schiff Kennedy began opening the first folder with theatrical intent. "Let us discuss your renowned quotation. The instance where you stated you possessed more than circumstantial proof of Russian collusion. That was quite a declaration. Like my Uncle Beauregard, claiming he captured a catfish the size of a river barge. He produced a scrupulously organized timeline diagram. The distinction is, Uncle Beauregard possessed a photograph. You, sir, possessed nothing but hot air and a compliant press corps. By my calculation, and I am just a simple country lawyer who can do arithmetic. You deceived the American populace regarding Russian collusion exactly 237 times. I know this because I tallied each instance twice. I had my staff verify it 3 times. Schiff straightened in his seat. "I always maintained that we possessed evidence." "Oh, that is fascinating," Kennedy interrupted, reaching for a compact digital recorder. "Because I have here a recording from a closed session of your committee dated March 17, 2019. Would you like me to broadcast it?" Schiff's lawyers huddled closer. One whispered urgently that the material was classified. "Was classified," Kennedy corrected cheerfully. "Declassified last month." It is amusing how the truth has a method of finding sunlight eventually. He pressed the play button. Schiff's voice permeated the room, stating, "We lack direct evidence yet, but I am confident we will discover it if we continue searching." Yet, that very evening, Kennedy continued pausing the recording. "You appeared on CNN and informed Anderson Cooper you possessed smoking gun evidence. That is comparable to claiming you have gumbo when all you possess is an empty pot and wishful thinking." The press section was frantically transcribing notes, but their expressions had transformed. This was not the narrative they had arrived to report. "But wait, there is more," Kennedy stated, channeling his finest salesman voice. "Let me ask you something, Congressman. Did you know Dmitry Volkov?" Schiff's face went from pallid to ashen. "I do not recall." "Let me refresh your memory," Kennedy offered obligingly. "Harvard Law School class of 1985. Your roommate for 2 years. Son of a Russian diplomat. An interesting individual. Currently employed by a Russian state energy conglomerate. You projected your own Russian connections onto President Trump, like a cinema projecting a film. He produced a photograph of a young Schiff and Volkov at Harvard, with arms draped around each other, smiling at the lens. In Louisiana, we term that psychological projection. It is similar to a thief assuming everyone else is stealing. Schiff attempted to recover. That meeting with the committee was classified. You just admitted to what Kennedy asked innocently, playing a declassified audio clip. But speaking of classified data, did you not discuss that same classified meeting on CNN that very night? Let me look here. He retrieved a tablet and played a CNN segment from the identical date. There was Schiff telling Anderson Cooper details from the ostensibly classified gathering. Your memory is more abbreviated than a politician's pledge at election time, Kennedy observed. Or perhaps you simply concluded, rules do not apply to you. Like my grandmother used to say, rules are for thee, not for me. Except she was describing hypocrites, not endorsing the methodology. The comparison between the Nunes memo and the Schiff memo was even more devastating. Kennedy laid out both documents side by side on the table, using a ruler to indicate specific sections like an instructor with a particularly slow pupil. Now, the Nunes memo stated the FISA warrant was predicated on the unverified Steele dossier. You labeled that a falsehood. It turns out it was verified. Nunes stated the FBI failed to inform the FISA court who financed the dossier. You claimed that was untrue. Turns out it is true as gospel. Everything in the Nunes memo was verified. Everything in your memo was debunked, like a mythological creature sighting. He looked up at Schiff with exaggerated sympathy. Martin, you are batting zero while styling yourself an all-star. That is like my cousin Thibodeau claiming he is a race car driver because he once drove rapidly to the grocery store. A Republican senator could not suppress a laugh. Even some Democrats were struggling to maintain their composure. But here is my favorite section. Kennedy continued warming to his subject. You spent 3 years claiming you possessed evidence. My grandmother used to say the rooster that crows loudest laid the fewest eggs. You crowed about Russia from every rooftop in Washington, every television studio in New York, and every podcast in California. He paused for effect, then delivered the decisive strike. But your nest is emptier than a politician's promises. You did not possess evidence. You possessed hopes, dreams, and a compliant media. That is not investigation, Congressman. That is fiction writing, and not even competent fiction. Stephen King writes superior fiction, and his monsters are more plausible than your evidence. Schiff's lead attorney stood up. Mr. Chairman, I object to the characterization. Sit down, Counselor Kennedy said gently. This is not a courtroom, and your client is not under oath. Though given his relationship with the truth, that might not matter much anyway. He closed the Russia folder with a satisfied snap. You know what the genuine tragedy is, Congressman. While you were chasing phantoms and pursuing your Russia fantasies, real threats to America went uninvestigated. Real corruption went unpunished, all because you were too occupied playing captain to your white whale of Russian collusion. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, studying Schiff like an entomologist, examining a particularly interesting specimen of insect. But do not worry, we are just getting started. Like my grandfather used to say, when you are draining the swamp, you find the biggest reptiles at the bottom. And, sir, we are about to go deep-sea diving in your career. He reached for the next folder labeled Whistleblower Scandal in large, bold letters. Now, this one here is particularly interesting because this is where you went from being incorrect to being corrupt. It is like the difference between stepping in a puddle and jumping in the swamp with both feet. Schiff was perspiring now despite the climate control. His team of lawyers looked like they were reconsidering their life choices. Shall we continue your education? Congressman Kennedy asked sweetly. "After all, you were worried about my ignorance. I am just trying to clear things up. Consider this a complimentary seminar in ethics. I know Harvard charged you a fortune, but apparently they offered refunds on that particular class. Now, let us talk about your little whistleblower friend." Kennedy began opening the second folder with the care of a surgeon preparing to operate. "You know, the one you definitely never met, never coordinated with, and certainly never coached. That whistleblower." He pulled out a detailed timeline that looked like something from a homicide investigation board. August 12th, 2019. Your staff meets with the whistleblower. August 12th, 2019. Same exact day, whistleblower files complaint. Now, I am not a betting man, but those odds are longer than my Aunt Gertrude's grocery list. Schiff shifted in his seat. There was no coordination. "Hold on now," Kennedy interrupted, pulling out his phone. "I am going to do something that might seem a little unconventional. I am going to text the whistleblower right now. Let us see. Hey, remember those meetings with Schiff's staff?" The hearing room went dead silent. Kennedy's phone buzzed almost immediately. "Well, would you look at that?" Kennedy said, showing the screen to the cameras. "Response says which time seems like your whistleblower friend has a different recollection than you do, Congressman." Schiff's face had gone from gray to green. His lawyers were frantically whispering. "But wait! It gets better," Kennedy announced, producing a photograph. "This here is from a restaurant in Georgetown. Fancy place, $200 steaks. And look who is having dinner together on August 5th, 1 week before the complaint was filed." The photo clearly showed Schiff dining with a younger man, both leaning in conspiratorially over their meals. You coached the witness, then acted more surprised than a raccoon in a garbage can with the lid slammed shut. That is like a fireman who starts fires just so he can put them out and play hero. Kennedy then pulled out a transcript handling it like evidence in a courtroom. But the real masterpiece was your parody of President Trump's phone call. Let me refresh everyone's memory. He played audio of Schiff's infamous parody, reading his dramatic interpretation of Trump's call that bore no resemblance to reality. "Now let us compare that to the actual transcript," Kennedy said, pulling out the real document. He read sections side by side, the contrast devastating. "You lied on national television, made up quotes, created dialogue that never existed. In Louisiana, we call that fraud. In California, apparently, you call it parody, like calling a bank robbery an unauthorized withdrawal." The press section was in overdrive now. Cameras clicking, keyboards clacking. This was not the narrative they had expected. But here is where it gets really interesting. Kennedy continued his drawl, becoming more pronounced as he warmed to his subject. "You hid 17 witness testimonies that contradicted your narrative. 17 that is more hidden than my Uncle Claude's moonshine stash." He began reading excerpts from the hidden testimonies, each one destroying Schiff's carefully constructed narrative. Ambassador Volker saw no evidence of collusion. Tim Morrison, "I saw nothing illegal in the call." Kurt Volker, "There was no quid pro quo. You hid evidence like a squirrel hides nuts, except squirrels do it for survival. You did it for political gain." Kennedy then produced a model of the Capitol building and placed it on the desk with theatrical flair. "And let us talk about your basement bunker. You held secret hearings in the basement like some sort of comic book villain, except heroes fight for justice. You were fighting due process." He pointed to the basement, with a pointer he had pulled from somewhere. "Republicans denied entry witnesses coached in secret selective leaks to friendly media. You turned the United States Capitol into your personal star chamber. King George would have been proud." The Founding Fathers, they are spinning in their graves fast enough to power the eastern seaboard. A young Republican congressman could not contain himself. That is exactly what happened. They locked us out. Order, the chairman said weakly, but his heart was not in it. The damage was being done. Kennedy pulled out one more document from the whistleblower folder. Here is my favorite part. This is an email from your staff to the whistleblower. Subject line suggested revisions to your complaint. You edited his homework like a teacher with a red pen. Then you had the audacity to act surprised when the homework you helped write showed up on your desk. He shook his head sadly. That is like being shocked to find gambling in a casino. My departed grandmother had a saying, "You can put lipstick on a pig, but it is still a pig. You put lipstick, mascara, and a whole beauty salon treatment on this pig of a scandal, but it is still swine." Schiff attempted one last defense. The president was threatening national security. The only threat to national security, Kennedy interrupted, was a congressman who thinks the rules do not apply to him. You weaponized the Intelligence Committee, turned oversight into overthrow, and made a mockery of due process. He closed the whistleblower folder with finality. You know what really gets me? You are a former prosecutor. You know better. It is like a doctor who took the Hippocratic Oath deciding to poison patients. You did not just betray your office. You betrayed your training, your ethics, and most importantly, you betrayed the American people who trusted you to be fair. Kennedy pulled out a handkerchief and cleaned his glasses again, taking his time. But I am just a simple country lawyer. What do I know about complex things like not lying to America and following the law? Those must be advanced concepts they do not teach in the backwoods of Louisiana. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ready for folder number 3. Congressman, or do you need a recess to come up with new excuses? Because I have got to tell you, the ones you are using now are weaker than gas station coffee. Now, before we dive into this folder, Kennedy began adjusting his glasses with theatrical precision. I need to establish something. You and Congressman Eric Swalwell, both California Democrats, both on the Intelligence Committee, you all are like peas in a pod. Except Eric got caught in a honey trap by a Chinese spy, and you, well, you just got money trapped. He opened the folder marked Chinese Connections with the reverence of someone handling historical documents. Let us start with your donor list. Amazing how many of your contributors have ties to the Chinese Communist Party. It is like a who's who of Beijing's influence operations. Kennedy pulled out a complex financial chart that looked like a spider web. James Chang donated $50,000 to your campaigns, also happens to be on the board of 3 companies directly owned by the Chinese government. Linda Wu, $75,000 in donations. Her husband runs the U.S. branch of China Construction Bank. Should I continue? Schiff's attorneys were furiously taking notes, trying to keep up. But here is where it gets really interesting, Kennedy said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Then, without warning, he spoke in perfect Mandarin Chinese. Congressman, can you understand what I am saying? The room went dead silent. Everyone stared at Schiff, who had involuntarily started to respond in Mandarin before catching himself. His mouth was half open, frozen in horror at his mistake. Interesting language skills you have there, Congressman Kennedy observed, switching back to English with his drawl intact. Where exactly did you learn Mandarin, and why did you understand my question about your Chinese handlers? The press section exploded with activity. This was the moment that would lead every news broadcast. But wait, it gets better, Kennedy announced, pulling out his phone. Let us see what Chinese state media is saying right now. Oh, would you look at that article published in the People's Daily, published 47 minutes ago during this hearing. He read from his phone. Congressman Schiff defends China's interests against racist attacks. They are watching and cheering you on in real time. You are their most valuable puppet. Kennedy then produced bank records that painted a damning picture. Every time you voted against sanctions on China deposit. Every time you killed legislation critical of Beijing deposit. Every time you defended Chinese trade practices deposit. You are more reliable than a Swiss watch if Swiss watches were owned by the Chinese Communist Party. He displayed a timeline showing Schiff's votes and corresponding bank deposits. March 2019 vote against Uyghur sanctions bill. March 20th, 25,000 deposited in your wife's consulting firm. June 20th, kill Taiwan defense legislation in committee. June 15th, $40,000 in speaking fees from a Chinese-American organization funded by Beijing. Those are coincidences, Schiff protested weakly. Coincidences, Kennedy laughed. Son, if these are coincidences, then I am the Emperor of China. The only thing coincidental here is how every pro-China vote coincidentally makes you richer. He pulled out intelligence assessments that had been declassified. According to FBI counterintelligence, Chinese state media has mentioned you favorably 847 times in the last 5 years. They have mentioned me exactly 0 times. Wonder why that is? Could it be because I do not vote the way Beijing wants? Kennedy then delivered another surprise. You know who else is interesting? Your former colleague, Senator Dianne Feinstein. Her driver for 20 years was a Chinese spy. You both knew. You both protected each other like a mutual destruction pact, except the destruction was of American interests. He showed classified briefing logs. January 2018, FBI briefs you on Chinese influence operations in Congress. February 2018, you vote against every China-related security measure. March 2018, you publicly call concerns about China xenophobic. That is not oversight. That is overlooking. The pattern was undeniable and damaging. Every anti-China bill that came through your committee killed every pro-China bill fast-tracked. You are more consistent than grits at a Southern breakfast. Consistently serving Beijing's interest, Kennedy pulled out one more document. This is testimony from a Chinese defector, former intelligence officer. He says, and I quote, Schiff was considered a reliable asset for shaping American policy in China's favor. Not recruited, but useful nonetheless. Even Chinese intelligence thinks you are their boy. That is outrageous. Schiff started. You know what is outrageous, Kennedy interrupted. Selling out American workers to China, selling out American technology to China, selling out American security to China, all while getting rich from Chinese connected money. He leaned back in his chair, studying Schiff like a specimen. In Louisiana, we have a saying, when you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas. You have been lying down with the Chinese Communist Party. And, sir, you are infested. Kennedy pulled out his final piece of evidence from the China folder. Here is the most damning part. After classified briefings on Chinese military threats, your investment portfolio shows purchases of Chinese stocks. You literally bet against America and for China. That is not just wrong. That is not just corrupt. That is borderline treasonous. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Now, I am not saying you are a Chinese agent, Kennedy clarified. I am saying you vote like one prophet, like one, and defend Beijing like one. If it walks like a Peking duck and quacks like a Peking duck, he closed the China folder with finality. You know what really burns my grits? American factories closed because of China. American jobs lost because of China. American technology stolen by China. And through it all, Adam Schiff got richer, while American workers got poorer. Kennedy's voice rose with genuine anger. You sold out the working families of America for Chinese cash. You are supposed to represent California, not Beijing. But I guess it is hard to tell the difference when you are cashing checks from both. He reached for the next folder labeled Media Manipulation. Speaking of selling out, let us talk about how you have corrupted the free press, because a congressman who lies is bad enough. A congressman who gets the media to spread his lies, that is a whole different level of swamp creature. You know, Kennedy began settling back into a storytelling mode. My Uncle Boudreaux had an old boat that leaked something terrible. No matter how much we patched, water kept coming in. That boat was more watertight than your office when it comes to leaking classified information. He opened the media folder and pulled out a stack of papers that must have been 6 inches thick. By my count, and I had 3 separate analysts verify this, your office was the source of 438 unauthorized leaks to the media. 438. That is more leaks than my Uncle Bobby's fishing boat. And that thing sank in Lake Pontchartrain. Kennedy began laying out the evidence methodically, like a prosecutor building a case. But these were not just any leaks. These were specifically timed, carefully orchestrated, designed to maximize political damage. You turned intelligence into entertainment classification, into clickbait. Suddenly, Kennedy's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his eyes widened with what could only be described as theatrical delight. Well, speak of the devil, look at this, folks. He held up his phone to the cameras. Text message just came in from a CNN anchor. Let me read this. What is my opinion supposed to be today, Adam? The hearing room erupted. Schiff lunged for his own phone, frantically typing. Oh, you trying to warn them? Kennedy asked innocently. Too late. See, that was not really from CNN. That was from my staff using a spoofed number. But your reaction just confirmed you regularly coordinate talking points. Thanks for that. Schiff's face went from pale to purple. He had been played like a fiddle, but we do have real evidence of media coordination. Kennedy continued producing actual screenshots like this. Hot mic moment from your appearance on MSNBC. He played the audio. Schiff's voice, thinking he was off air. Make sure Jake gets the 3 talking points Tapper needs to hit them hard tonight. So you are not just leaking to the media, Kennedy observed. You are directing them like a conductor with an orchestra, except the music you are making is the sound of journalism dying. Kennedy pulled out financial records showing a different kind of corruption. But it is not just about controlling the narrative. It is about profit. Speaking fees from media companies, $1.2 million over 5 years paid contributor contracts. Another $800,000 book deals with publishers owned by media conglomerates. $3 million. He shook his head in mock admiration. You turned intelligence work into a profit center. P.T. Barnum would be proud, except he was honest about being in the circus business. The evidence of fake news manufacturing was even more damaging. Kennedy produced side-by-side comparisons of original documents versus what Schiff presented to the media. Original email says, meeting. You changed it to secret meeting. And original says, discussion. You changed it to conspiracy. You edit evidence like a Hollywood script doctor, except movies are labeled fiction. Kennedy pulled out a thick binder labeled Doctored Evidence. 127 instances of altered documents, 89 cases of selectively edited transcripts, 234 misleading characterizations. You do not spin the truth. You put it in a blender and hit puree. He looked up at the press section, making eye contact with as many journalists as possible. And you, all in the media, some of you are victims. Some of you are accomplices. But you all got played by a congressman who views truth as optional and facts as flexible. Kennedy then produced what might have been his most effective prop yet, a dictionary. I brought this to help Congressman Schiff. See, there is a word in here, journalism. Definition: the activity of gathering, assessing, creating, and presenting news and information. Nowhere does it say taking dictation from Adam Schiff. The press section was notably quieter now, many journalists looking uncomfortable. But here is the real kicker. Kennedy continued, returning to the evidence. We tracked the timeline of your leaks against market movements. Every time you leaked market-sensitive information, certain people made millions in trades. Want to guess who those people were connected to? He did not wait for an answer. Your donors, your allies, your financial network. You did not just leak for political gain, you leaked for profit. That is not just unethical. That is criminal. Kennedy pulled out one final piece of evidence from the media folder. A compilation video of Schiff making contradictory statements to different media outlets, sometimes on the same day. To CNN, you say one thing. To MSNBC, another. To Fox, when you rarely appear, something completely different. You are like a chameleon, except chameleons change color for survival. You do it for ratings and profit. The video was devastating, showing Schiff contradicting himself dozens of times. You know what we call someone who tells different stories to different people in Louisiana? Kennedy asked. A liar. But I guess in California, you call it media strategy. He closed the media folder with disgust. The First Amendment guarantees a free press because democracy needs truth. You have turned the press into your personal propaganda machine. That is not just corruption of Congress. That is corruption of democracy itself. Kennedy took off his glasses and cleaned them again, a gesture that had become his signature move during the hearing. Thomas Jefferson said, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." But Jefferson assumed newspapers would tell the truth, not take dictation from Adam Schiff. He reached for the next folder labeled Impeachment Coup. Speaking of undermining democracy, let us talk about your impeachment circus. Because if manipulating the media was bad, what you did to the Constitution was worse. It is like the difference between pickpocketing and armed robbery. Both wrong, but one is a whole lot worse. Kennedy held up the folder marked Impeachment Coup and shook his head with theatrical sorrow. You know, when I was a boy in Louisiana, we would sometimes play hide-and-seek in my grandfather's barn. But even as children, we knew you could not just make up new rules in the middle of the game. Apparently, that is a lesson they do not teach at Harvard Law. He pulled out a detailed floor plan of the Capitol building and placed it on the desk with the reverence of a museum curator handling a precious artifact. This here is the Capitol basement, the Schiff, a place for classified briefings, not kangaroo courts. But you turned it into your personal star chamber. Like a comic book villain, except villains usually have better plans. Kennedy pointed to specific rooms with a laser pointer he had produced from somewhere. Behind these closed doors, you held your secret trials. Republicans locked out. Witnesses coached in private. Selective leaks to friendly media. Due process died in that basement, murdered by a congressman who forgot his oath to the Constitution. A Republican congressman from Ohio could not contain himself. I was locked out of those hearings. My constituents were denied representation. Order, the chairman said weakly. But Kennedy was already moving on. But let us talk about witness coaching. Kennedy continued, pulling out a tablet. I have got something special here. A video testimony that came in just this morning from one of your star witnesses. He pressed play. A middle-aged man appeared on screen, looking uncomfortable but determined. My name is William Taylor. I testified in the impeachment hearings. I need to clear my conscience. Congressman Schiff's staff coached me extensively. They told me what to say, how to say it, and what to avoid. When I expressed concerns about the truth, they said the truth was less important than the narrative. I was threatened with career destruction if I did not comply. The hearing room exploded. Even Democrats looked shocked. Schiff's lawyers were in full panic mode. That has been edited, Schiff protested desperately. Has it now? Kennedy asked mildly. Well, good news, Mr. Taylor is willing to testify under oath today in public, unlike your basement trials. Kennedy then did something unexpected. He pulled out a pocket constitution and held it up. Pop quiz Congressman Schiff. Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. What does it say about impeachment? Do not Google it, though. I know that is your first instinct for finding facts. Schiff glared, but began to recite. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery. Stop right there, Kennedy interrupted. Treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. Now show me where it says hurt feelings or mean tweets or Adam Schiff does not like you. Laughter rippled through the gallery. You see, Kennedy continued, you did not just break procedural rules. You violated every precedent in American history. Let me list them. He pulled out a prepared list and began reading. Precedent, the accused gets to confront witnesses. You broke it. Precedent, minority party, gets equal subpoena power. You broke it. Precedent, open hearings except for classified material. You broke it. Precedent, due process rights. You broke it. Precedent, presumption of innocence. You definitely thought you broke it. You made up rules like a child playing games, except the game was rigged. Kennedy then produced comparison charts showing every previous impeachment process versus Schiff's version. Andrew Johnson's impeachment, more due process than yours. Nixon's near impeachment, more fair than yours. Clinton's impeachment, a model of procedural justice compared to yours. You know you have gone too far when Bill Clinton's impeachment looks like a fair trial in comparison. He pulled out transcripts from the basement hearings that had been declassified. But here is what really gets me. You claim to be defending democracy while acting like a tin-pot dictator. Stalin would have been proud of your show trials. At least he was honest about being a tyrant. A voice from the gallery called out, "What about the Constitution?" Kennedy nodded approvingly. Exactly the right question. What about the Constitution? Congressman Schiff swore an oath to defend it. Instead, he used it as disposable paper in his basement courtroom. He turned back to Schiff with genuine anger. Now you know what the worst part is. Real crimes go uninvestigated while you chase phantoms. Real corruption goes unpunished while you conduct show trials. Real threats to America go unaddressed while you play partisan games. Kennedy pulled out one final document from the impeachment folder. This is a letter from Alexander Hamilton, Federalist 65. He warned about impeachment being abused for partisan purposes. He said, and I quote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." He looked up at Schiff. Hamilton saw you coming 230 years ago. He warned us about politicians like you and we did not listen. Kennedy closed the impeachment folder with finality. You turned a constitutional tool into a political weapon. You turned due process into no process. You turned the people's house into your personal playhouse. He shook his head sadly. My grandmother used to say power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. You had absolute power in that basement, and you proved my grandmother right. Kennedy then stood up, something he had not done during the entire hearing. You know what I need to say something directly to the American people. He turned to face the cameras. What you witnessed was not impeachment. It was a coup attempt dressed up in constitutional clothing. It was a partisan hit job masquerading as principled oversight. It was everything the founders feared when they gave Congress impeachment power. He sat back down and looked at Schiff, who had shrunk into his chair. But the good news is, truth has a way of surfacing. Like cream in milk, it rises to the top. And today, the truth about your impeachment sham is finally seeing daylight. Kennedy reached for the final folder. One more to go. Congressman. The grand finale, the masterpiece, or as we say in Louisiana, the last dance at the Fée d'Odu. The hearing room had transformed over the past 2 hours. What began as a packed arena of confident Democrats and smug media had become a somber courtroom where truth was systematically destroying lies. Schiff sat slumped in his chair, his expensive suit wrinkled with sweat, his hands visibly trembling. His team of lawyers had shrunk from 5 to 2, the others having quietly excused themselves during the last break. Kennedy opened the final folder with the careful precision of a surgeon preparing for the last cut. You know, Congressman Schiff, we have covered a lot of ground today. Russia lies, whistleblower coaching donor scandals, and Chinese money media manipulation, impeachment games. That is quite a career you have built. Like a house of cards, impressive to look at. But one breath of truth, and it all falls down. He pulled out a document that made Schiff's remaining lawyers exchange panicked glances. This here is interesting. It is your personal financial disclosure from 2015. Net worth approximately $500,000. Not bad for a public servant. Now here is your 2023 disclosure. Net worth approximately $4.5 million. That is an 800% increase. Either you are the world's greatest investor or public service pays better than we thought. Kennedy laid out year by year financial records, creating a damning timeline of enrichment. Every scandal we have discussed today made you richer. Every lie you told paid dividends. Every betrayal of public trust came with a bonus. You are like a corruption capitalist. You found a way to monetize malfeasance. Just then, something unexpected happened. Schiff's chief counsel stood up abruptly. Mr. Chairman, I need to state for the record that I can no longer represent Mr. Schiff in this matter. Ethical obligations prevent me from continuing. The lawyer gathered his papers and walked out, leaving Schiff visibly stunned. On live television, his own attorney had abandoned him. Well, Kennedy drawled, when the rats start leaving the ship, you know it is sinking. Though comparing your lawyer to a rat might be unfair to rats, they show loyalty. The remaining lawyer whispered urgently in Schiff's ear, but Schiff pushed him away, his composure finally cracking completely. This is a setup, Schiff shouted, his voice cracking. This is Trump's revenge. This is consequences, Kennedy interrupted calmly. Something you have avoided your whole career. But like my grandfather used to say, the chickens always come home to roost. And Congressman, your whole farm just showed up. A Democratic congresswoman from California stood up unexpectedly. I cannot sit here silently anymore, she said, her voice shaking. I am from California. I have watched Adam Schiff operate for years. Director Kennedy is right. We have enabled this corruption through our silence. I cannot be complicit anymore. The defection from his own party seemed to break something in Schiff. His hands were shaking so badly he knocked over his water glass. But we are not quite done, Kennedy continued, pulling out one final set of documents. These are criminal referrals I will be submitting to the Department of Justice immediately following this hearing. Let me read the charges. He put on his reading glasses with theatrical precision. Perjury, 17 counts. Every time you lied to Congress under oath. Leaking classified information, 23 counts, each one documented. Obstruction of justice, 11 counts. Hiding evidence, witness tampering. RICO violations, 7 counts. Running a criminal enterprise from your office. Wire fraud, 9 counts. Those Chinese wire transfers. Campaign finance violations. 31 counts. Ed Buck was just the beginning. The list went on, each charge backed by evidence presented during the hearing. That is 98 federal charges, Congressman. In Louisiana, we would say you are in more trouble than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Kennedy stood up again, this time gathering all his folders. You know what the saddest part is? You had potential. Harvard education law degree, elected to Congress. You could have served honorably. Instead, you chose lies over truth, power over principle, profit over people. He looked directly at Schiff with what could only be described as pity. My mother taught me to end with something positive. So here it is. You have provided a perfect example of how not to serve in public office. Future generations will study your career as a cautionary tale. You will be remembered just not the way you hoped. Kennedy then delivered his final blow with devastating Southern politeness. Bless your heart, Congressman Schiff. And when you are sitting in federal prison, and maybe you will have time to read that ethics thesis you wrote at Harvard, the one about prosecutorial integrity. Consider it remedial education. The hearing room was dead silent. Schiff sat, destroyed, his career in ruins. His crimes exposed, his allies fled. But Kennedy was not quite finished. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said formally, I move that this committee recommend immediate criminal investigation of Congressman Adam Schiff, immediate revocation of his security clearances, and immediate ethics investigation into his conduct. All in favor, every Republican hand shot up. After a moment, 3 Democratic hands joined them. Then 5, then 7. Even members of his own party could not defend the indefensible anymore. Motion carries, the chairman announced somberly. As the gavel came down, Schiff tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He had to be helped from his chair by his remaining attorney. The man who had entered the hearing room with supreme confidence was leaving as a broken shell. One more thing, Kennedy called out, as Schiff was being led away. That accent you mocked, that backward Southern way of talking, it just ended your career. Guess slow and steady really does win the race. He packed up his briefcase, the same battered case he had arrived with, and prepared to leave. But before he did, he turned to the cameras one last time, to the American people watching. This is what accountability looks like. This is what happens when truth confronts lies. This is what justice means. Not partisan games, not political theater, but actual consequences for corruption. He smiled, his Louisiana charm returning. And to my constituents back home, thank you for sending this simple country lawyer to Washington. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to clean up the inside. Today was a good day for truth. As Kennedy walked out, the gallery erupted in applause. Not partisan cheering, but the genuine appreciation of Americans who who had watched corruption finally face consequences. The last image on the cameras was Schiff being helped into a car. His career over his crimes exposed, his empire collapsed. The smooth-talking California congressman had been destroyed by a slow-talking Louisiana senator who proved that wisdom beats cleverness, truth beats lies, and authentic service beats corruption every single time. The hearing ended without fanfare. No gavel slammed. No one was led away. Schiff gathered his papers, whispered something to his remaining staff, and left through the side door. Kennedy packed his briefcase and walked out the main entrance, stopping briefly to answer reporters' questions with non-committal Southern politeness. Washington does not change overnight. It rarely changes at all. In the weeks that followed, the hearing generated the predictable partisan reactions. Conservative media called it a demolition. Liberal outlets labeled it a witch hunt. Most Americans exhausted by political theater moved on to the next crisis within days. The House Ethics Committee opened a preliminary review standard procedure that could drag on for years or quietly disappear. The Department of Justice acknowledged receiving Kennedy's referrals with a form letter. Whether anything would come of them was anyone's guess. Schiff retained his committee positions. He continued appearing on Sunday shows, though perhaps less frequently. His fundraising dipped but did not collapse. In Washington, survival is often just a matter of waiting for the next scandal to shift attention elsewhere. But there were subtle shifts. Younger Democrats began distancing themselves, hedging their support with phrases like, "I do not agree with everything he has done." Donors became harder to reach. Speaking fees decreased death by 1,000 cuts the Washington way. Kennedy returned to Louisiana, where he told supporters, "I said my piece showed my evidence. What happens next is not up to me." When pressed about whether justice was served, he responded, "Justice in Washington is like humidity in Louisiana. You know it exists, but you cannot quite grab hold of it." 6 months later, Schiff announced he would focus on new opportunities after his current term. Not a resignation, not an admission, just a slow fade that passes for accountability in politics. The media coverage evolved from fierce defense to quiet abandonment. Not a retraction. Journalists rarely admit error, but a gradual forgetting. Schiff's name appeared less frequently. His opinions sought less often. No one went to prison. No one was formally censured. The system protected itself as it always does, but the transcripts remained public. The evidence Kennedy presented became part of the congressional record. Law students would study it. Historians would reference it. Sometimes that is all the victory you get, putting truth on record, even if justice never follows. A year later, a reporter asked Kennedy if he was satisfied with the outcome. In Louisiana, he said, "We do not expect alligators to become vegetarians. We just try to keep them from eating the chickens. Sometimes showing them you are watching is enough to make them hunt elsewhere." The reporter pressed, so nothing really changed. Kennedy smiled. "Son in Washington, making someone irrelevant is the harshest sentence there is. Nobody goes to jail, but everybody knows. That is how this town works. Death by reputation, not by jury." Perhaps the truest assessment came from an unnamed senator years later. Kennedy did not destroy Schiff in that hearing. He just documented the decline that was already happening. Sometimes that is enough. The hearing changed nothing and everything. The perpetual paradox of Washington scandals. The system endured. The players remained. But power shifted imperceptibly. Reputations adjusted quietly. And history recorded another moment when someone stood up with folders full of facts in a city built on fiction. In Washington, that counts as a victory.